Go ahead and smash that subscribe button and leave a comment below so we can keep bringing you more magic. Now, double bubble toil and trouble, let's dive right in. 1. Grayson Knox adjusted the rearview mirror of his battered, black Chevy truck. The streets of New Orleans at midnight were unforgiving, shadows lurking around every corner. He glanced over at his passenger, a young witch named Emily, barely 16. She fidgeted with the hem of her skirt, eyes darting nervously. "Relax," he said, his voice a gravelly murmur. "Phyllis won't bite. Not unless you provoke her." Emily nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. "I've heard stories about her," she whispered. "Stories are just that," Grayson replied. "Stories. Phyllis knows her stuff. She'll help you find your familiar." They drove in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional bark of a distant dog. The city was alive with a dangerous energy, the kind that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Grayson's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. A text from an unknown number: "Watch your back, Knox. The shadows are coming." He cursed under his breath. The Shadows, a notorious local gang, had been causing trouble for months. Their leader, Rico, was a ruthless bastard with a penchant for dark magic. Grayson knew they'd be interested in Emily. Her raw, untamed power was a prize they couldn't resist. "We need to move faster," Grayson said, stepping on the gas. "We might have company." Emily's eyes widened. "The Shadows?" "Yeah. Rico's gang. They're bad news." The Impala roared down the narrow streets, swerving around corners with precision. Grayson's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The sooner they got to Phyllis, the better. Finally, they arrived at a run-down shack on the outskirts of the French Quarter. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, the paint peeling off in long, ugly strips. But Grayson knew better. He parked the car and turned to Emily. "Stay close," he instructed. "And don't say a word unless Phyllis talks to you first." Emily nodded, her face pale. They approached the door and Grayson knocked 3 times, a specific rhythm. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with strange, arcane symbols. Phyllis stood in the doorway, a tall, imposing figure with piercing green eyes and a mane of wild gray hair. "Grayson Knox," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr. "And who's this young thing?" "This is Emily," Grayson replied. "She needs your help to find her familiar." Phyllis eyed Emily, her gaze intense. "Come in then. Quickly." They stepped inside, and Phyllis shut the door behind them, bolting it with a heavy iron latch. The interior of the shack was cluttered with all manner of magical paraphernalia: jars of herbs, animal bones, ancient tomes, and candles of every color. Phyllis led them to a small, round table in the center of the room. She motioned for Emily to sit, then turned to Grayson. "Why is the child here, Grayson?" Phyllis asked, her eyes narrowing. "What's the rush?" "The Shadows are after her," Grayson explained. "Rico wants to use her in their gang war." Phyllis's expression darkened. "Rico," she spat. "That bastard. All right, we'll make this quick." She lit a bundle of sage, the pungent smoke filling the room. Chanting softly, she circled Emily, waving the smoke around her. Emily closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. "Stay calm, child," Phyllis murmured. "I need you to focus. Think about the first time you felt your magic. What were you doing? How did it feel?" Emily took a deep breath. "I was in the garden," she said softly. "I felt connected to everything. Like I could feel the plants breathing." Phyllis nodded, continuing her chant. The air grew thick with tension, the room seeming to pulse with energy. Grayson watched, every muscle in his body coiled, ready for action. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside. Grayson drew his gun, instinct taking over. "We've got company," he hissed. Phyllis didn't break her concentration. "Keep them out. We're almost done." Grayson nodded, moving to the window. He peeked through a crack in the boards. 3 figures loomed in the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods. The Shadows had found them. He turned back to Phyllis. "Hurry," he urged. Phyllis intensified her chanting, the smoke swirling faster. Emily's body tensed, her eyes rolling back. The room shook, the candles flickering wildly. The door rattled, and Grayson knew they didn't have much time. He aimed his gun at the entrance, ready to defend Emily at all costs. With a final powerful incantation, Phyllis finished the ritual. Emily gasped, her eyes snapping open, glowing with an otherworldly light. A small ethereal creature materialized beside her, a fox with shimmering fur and eyes like emeralds. "Her familiar," Phyllis said, her voice triumphant. "It's done." The door burst open, and the shadows stormed in. Grayson fired, hitting the first intruder square in the chest. The second lunged at him, a knife glinting in the dim light. Grayson ducked, grabbing the assailant's wrist and twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. Phyllis grabbed a handful of powder from a nearby jar, throwing it into the air. It exploded in a flash of light, blinding the remaining attacker. Emily's fox familiar growled, its fur bristling. "We need to go," Grayson barked. "Now." They rushed out of the shack, Phyllis leading the way. The shadows were disoriented, stumbling in the aftermath of the powder blast. Grayson and Emily followed Phyllis down a narrow alley, the fox familiar darting at their heels. "We can't go back to the car," Phyllis said. "They'll be expecting that." Grayson nodded. "We need a safe house." Phyllis glanced over her shoulder. "I know a place. Follow me." They wound through the dark, labyrinthine streets of the French Quarter, the sounds of pursuit fading into the distance. Finally, they arrived at an old, crumbling building, its facade covered in ivy. Phyllis led them inside, bolting the door behind them. The interior was surprisingly cozy, filled with plush furniture and warm, inviting light. "We should be safe here," Phyllis said. "At least for a while." Emily collapsed onto a couch, her fox familiar curling up beside her. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now," Grayson said, sitting down heavily, "we figure out our next move. But first we rest." Phyllis nodded. "You did well, child. Your familiar will protect you. And so will we." Grayson leaned back, his eyes scanning the room. The danger was far from over, but for now, they had a moment of peace. He would take it, however fleeting it might be. 2. Hell leaned against the door, his senses heightened. The old building seemed secure for now, but he knew better than to let his guard down. Emily and her new fox familiar rested on the couch, their breathing synchronized in the quiet room. Phyllis busied herself with an assortment of herbs and crystals on a wooden table. "We need a plan," Grayson said, breaking the silence. "Rico and his gang won't stop. They'll keep coming until they get what they want." Phyllis nodded, her hands deftly mixing ingredients. "Agreed. We need to strike first. But Emily needs to understand her power better. Her familiar will help, but it's not enough." Emily sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What do you mean? What else do I need to do?" Phyllis turned, her green eyes piercing. "You need to learn control, child. Your magic is raw, untamed. You must harness it if you're to survive." Grayson crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on Emily. "Phyllis is right. We need to train you. And fast." Emily nodded, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "Okay. What do I need to do?" Phyllis smiled, a rare and unsettling sight. "We start with the basics. Meditation, focus, channeling your energy. Then we move on to spells and protection." Grayson moved to the window, peering through the cracked glass. The streets were eerily quiet, the night holding its breath. "We don't have much time. The shadows will regroup and come after us." Phyllis joined him at the window, her expression grave. "We have until dawn. After that, they'll be on our trail again." Emily stood, her familiar by her side. "Then let's get started." Phyllis guided Emily to a corner of the room, creating a small circle with chalk and candles. "Sit here. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply." Emily followed the instructions, her fox familiar settling beside her, its eyes glowing softly. Grayson watched, his mind racing. They were safe for now, but how long could they keep running? Hours passed as Phyllis instructed Emily, her voice a soothing chant. Emily's breathing slowed, her body relaxing into a trance-like state. The room filled with a faint, pulsing energy, the air crackling with power. Grayson felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew they were making progress, but the looming threat of the shadows hung over them like a dark cloud. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. Grayson tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Phyllis's eyes snapped open, her chant breaking. "Someone's here," Grayson whispered. Phyllis extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay quiet," she hissed. They moved silently to the window, peering out into the night. 3 figures approached, their movements slow and deliberate. Grayson recognized Rico's swagger, his heart pounding in his chest. "Damn it," he muttered. "How did they find us so quickly?" Phyllis cursed under her breath. "We need to leave. Now." Emily stood, her eyes wide with fear. "But we just got here." Grayson grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the back door. "No time to argue. We have to go." Phyllis led the way, her movements swift and silent. They slipped out into the narrow alley behind the building, the night air cool against their skin. Grayson kept his gun at the ready, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We need to find another safe house," he said, his voice low. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Phyllis nodded. "I know a place. An old friend's house. It's a bit of a walk, but it's our best shot." They moved quickly through the winding streets, the sounds of the city distant and muted. Grayson's mind raced, plans forming and dissolving as fast as he could think them. They needed allies, resources, and time, none of which they had in abundance. "Who is this friend?" Grayson asked, breaking the silence. "An old voodoo priestess," Phyllis replied. "She owes me a favor. She'll help us." Emily stumbled, exhaustion clear on her face. Her fox familiar nuzzled her leg, offering silent support. Grayson steadied her, his grip firm but gentle. "Hang in there," he said. "We're almost there." They arrived at a small, decrepit house on the edge of the French Quarter. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling, but the air around it buzzed with a subtle, protective energy. Phyllis knocked on the door, a complex rhythm that Grayson recognized as another magical code. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a frail elderly woman with strikingly sharp eyes. "Phyllis," the woman said, her voice a raspy whisper. "What brings you here at this hour?" "We need your help, Marie," Phyllis replied. "It's urgent." Marie stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The interior of the house was cluttered with relics, charms, and symbols of protection. It smelled of incense and old wood, a comforting scent in the chaos. "Tell me what's going on," Marie said, motioning for them to sit. Grayson and Emily sat on a worn couch, while Phyllis and Marie spoke in hushed tones. Grayson couldn't catch everything, but he picked up enough to know that Marie was powerful and well-connected in the magical community. "We can stay here for a bit," Phyllis said, turning to Grayson and Emily. "Marie has agreed to help us." Emily sighed in relief, her body visibly relaxing. "Thank you," she said to Marie. Marie nodded. "You're welcome, child. But know this, you're in deep trouble. The shadows are relentless. They'll stop at nothing to get to you." Grayson clenched his jaw. "We need to take the fight to them. We can't keep running." Phyllis and Marie exchanged a glance. "Agreed," Marie said. "But we need a plan. A strong one." They spent the next few hours strategizing, discussing options and potential allies. Grayson knew they had to hit the shadows hard and fast, but they also needed to protect Emily and her burgeoning powers. "We'll need to perform a binding spell," Marie said, "to protect Emily and her familiar. It will give us an edge." Phyllis nodded. "I'll handle the preparations. Grayson, you'll need to gather some supplies." Grayson stood, determination etched on his face. "Just tell me what we need." Marie handed him a list of ingredients and locations. "Be careful. The shadows will be watching." Grayson nodded, slipping the list into his pocket. "I'll be back soon." He left the house, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The streets were still dark, but he moved with purpose, his senses on high alert. As he gathered the necessary items, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The shadows were closing in, and the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Returning to Marie's house, Grayson felt a renewed sense of urgency. They had to act fast, strike hard, and hope it was enough to keep Emily safe. "We're ready," he said, handing the supplies to Phyllis. She nodded, her eyes fierce. "Then let's get to work." As they began the ritual, Grayson knew they were in for the fight of their lives. The shadows wouldn't rest until they had Emily, but he was determined to protect her, no matter the cost. The room filled with the hum of magic, the air crackling with energy. Emily stood in the center, her fox familiar by her side, both of them glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. "Focus, Emily," Phyllis said. "Channel your energy." Emily closed her eyes, her breathing steady. The room seemed to pulse with power, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. Suddenly, the front door crashed open, and Rico and his gang stormed in, weapons drawn. "Get down," Grayson shouted, pulling his gun. The room erupted into chaos. Grayson fired, hitting one of the shadows. Phyllis and Marie chanted, their voices weaving a protective barrier around Emily. Rico snarled, his eyes locked on Emily. "She's coming with us, Knox. You can't stop us." Grayson aimed at Rico, his grip steady. "Over my dead body." Rico lunged and Grayson fired. The bullet struck Rico in the shoulder, but he kept coming, his eyes wild with fury. Emily's fox familiar growled, leaping at Rico, its teeth bared. Rico swatted it away, but the distraction was enough. Emily raised her hands, her eyes glowing with power. "Enough," she shouted, her voice echoing with authority. A wave of energy exploded from her, sending Rico and his gang flying backward. The room shook, the walls rattling. Grayson shielded his eyes, the light blinding. When the light faded, Rico and his gang lay unconscious on the floor. Emily stood, her body glowing with a soft, pulsing light, her fox familiar at her side. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. Grayson lowered his gun, his heart pounding. "You did it," he said, amazement in his voice. Phyllis and Marie approached, their expressions a mix of pride and relief. "You have a powerful gift, child," Marie said. "Use it wisely." Emily nodded, her eyes clear and determined. "I will." Grayson smiled, a rare sight. "Let's get out of here. We have a lot to discuss." As they left the house, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Grayson felt a glimmer of hope. The fight was far from over, but they had a chance. And he would do whatever it took to protect Emily and her newfound power. 3. The dawn sun cast long shadows as Grayson Knox led Emily, Phyllis, and Marie through the quiet streets of New Orleans. The city was waking up, but the shadows of the night's battle lingered in their minds. Grayson knew they had won a skirmish, but the war was far from over. "Where to now?" Emily asked, her voice soft but steady. Her fox familiar trotted beside her, its emerald eyes alert. Grayson glanced at Phyllis and Marie. "We need a secure location to regroup and plan our next move." Phyllis nodded. "There's an old safe house in the Garden District. It belonged to a coven that used to operate here. It's abandoned now, but it should be safe." Marie agreed. "And we'll need to contact some allies. This fight isn't just ours anymore. Rico's dabbling in dark magic threatens the entire magical community." Grayson took the lead, guiding them through the maze of streets. As they moved, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows would be back, and they needed to be ready. The safe house was a grand old mansion, hidden behind tall iron gates and overgrown ivy. It had the aura of a place long forgotten, but as they stepped inside, Grayson felt the residual magic that still clung to the walls. It was a place of power. "We can set up here," Phyllis said, moving through the dusty rooms with a familiarity that suggested she had been here before. "Emily, you need to continue your training. Marie and I will work on fortifying the house and reaching out to our contacts." Grayson nodded. "I'll handle security. We need to know if anyone comes within a mile of this place." Hours turned into days as they settled into a routine. Emily spent her time meditating, practicing spells, and bonding with her familiar. Grayson patrolled the perimeter, setting up wards and traps. Phyllis and Marie communicated with other witches and magical beings, seeking allies for the coming battle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grayson sat with Emily on the back porch. The air was cool, the city sounds distant. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Emily shrugged, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's a lot to take in. I never imagined my life would be like this. But I feel stronger. More in control." Grayson nodded. "Good. You'll need that strength. Rico won't stop. He'll come back, and he'll be more dangerous than ever." Emily looked at him, determination in her eyes. "Then we have to be ready." Grayson smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. "We will be." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a commotion from inside the house. Grayson and Emily rushed in to find Phyllis and Marie huddled over a map, their faces serious. "What's going on?" Grayson asked. "We received word from one of our contacts," Marie said. "Rico is planning a major ritual. He's gathering his forces, preparing for something big." Phyllis pointed to a spot on the map. "Here. An old warehouse by the docks. It used to be a hub for illegal magical trade. Rico's turned it into his headquarters." Grayson studied the map. "We need to strike before he's ready. Take out his base, disrupt his plans." Marie nodded. "Agreed. But we'll need more than just the four of us." "We've got allies on the way," Phyllis said. "Witches, warlocks, and even a few werewolves. They'll meet us at the warehouse." Grayson felt a surge of hope. They had a fighting chance. The night of the attack came swiftly. Grayson, Emily, Phyllis, and Marie led a small but formidable group to the docks. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Grayson signaled for silence and they moved in, their steps silent on the cold, damp ground. Grayson peered through a broken window. Inside, Rico's gang was busy setting up for the ritual. Candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rico stood at the center, his eyes glowing with malevolent energy. "We go in fast and hard," Grayson whispered. "Take out the guards, disrupt the ritual. Emily, you stay close to Phyllis and Marie." Emily nodded, her hand gripping a small, silver dagger. Her fox familiar stood beside her, its fur bristling. Grayson gave the signal, and they moved. The doors burst open, and chaos erupted. Grayson fired his gun, taking down two of Rico's men before they could react. The rest of their group followed, spells and curses flying. Emily chanted a protection spell, her voice strong and clear. A shimmering shield surrounded them, deflecting incoming attacks. Phyllis and Marie unleashed their magic, their combined power formidable. Rico snarled, his eyes locking onto Emily. "You think you can stop me, girl? You're nothing." Emily stepped forward, her fox familiar growling at her side. "I'm more than you know," she said, her voice steady. Grayson engaged with one of Rico's lieutenants, their fight brutal and fast. He could see Emily and Rico facing off, the air around them crackling with energy. Rico raised his hands, dark tendrils of magic snaking towards Emily. She countered with a burst of light, the two forces colliding in a spectacular display. The warehouse shook, the floor cracking under the strain. Grayson took down his opponent, turning his attention to Rico. He saw Phyllis and Marie working together, their magic combining to create a powerful blast aimed at Rico. Rico screamed as the magic hit him, his body convulsing. Emily seized the moment, chanting a binding spell. Golden chains of light wrapped around Rico, tightening with each word she spoke. "Enough!" Emily shouted, her voice echoing through the warehouse. Rico fell to his knees, the dark energy fading from his eyes. The warehouse fell silent, the air heavy with the aftermath of battle. Grayson approached Emily, his gun still at the ready. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with exhaustion and relief. "We did it." Phyllis and Marie joined them, their expressions triumphant. "Rico's power is broken," Phyllis said. "But we need to make sure he can't come back." Marie nodded. "We'll take him to the council." They have ways of dealing with dark magic users. Grayson felt a weight lift off his shoulders. They had won a significant victory, but he knew there were still challenges ahead. As they left the warehouse, the first light of dawn breaking over the city, Grayson felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a chance to rebuild, to create a safer world for Emily and others like her. Emily looked at him, a tired smile on her face. "What's next?" Grayson smiled back. "We keep fighting. But first we rest. We've earned it." The city of New Orleans stretched out before them, a place of danger and magic, but also of hope and possibility. 4. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Garden District safe house, but the air was still thick with the remnants of last night's battle. Knox stood on the porch, sipping a bitter cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the quiet street. Inside, Emily and her fox familiar were resting, their bond stronger than ever. Phyllis and Marie were discussing their next steps, their voices a low murmur. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. "Meet at Jackson Square at noon. Urgent." He frowned, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Looks like we've got another meeting," he said, stepping back inside. Phyllis looked up, her expression wary. "Who with?" "Not sure," Grayson replied. "But they say it's urgent." Marie sighed, setting down her cup of tea. "We can't afford to ignore any potential allies." The battle with Rico was just the beginning. Emily joined them, her eyes clear and determined. "Then let's go. We need all the help we can get." They left the safe house, moving cautiously through the bustling streets. The city was waking up, unaware of the magical battles that raged beneath its surface. Jackson Square was crowded with tourists, artists, and street performers. Grayson scanned the area, looking for their contact. A tall, slender woman with dark hair and piercing blue eyes approached them. She wore a long, flowing dress that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. "Grayson Knox?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident. "That's me," Grayson replied, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Who are you?" "Name's Serafina," she said, extending a hand. "I'm with the Crescent Moon Coven. We heard about your run-in with Rico." Phyllis and Marie exchanged glances. "We could use your help," Phyllis said. "Rico was just a pawn. There's a bigger threat on the horizon." Serafina nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here. The Coven is preparing for war. We need to unite the magical community to stand a chance." Grayson shook her hand, feeling a spark of magic in her touch. "What's the plan?" Serafina gestured for them to follow her. "Let's talk somewhere private." They moved to a secluded corner of the square, where Serafina produced a small, ornate mirror from her bag. She whispered an incantation, and the mirror shimmered, revealing a hidden doorway in the brick wall. "Impressive," Grayson muttered as they stepped through the portal into a spacious, elegantly decorated room. Serafina led them to a large table covered with maps and documents. "The Crescent Moon Coven has been tracking a surge in dark magic activity," she explained. "Rico was just the beginning. There's a powerful necromancer named Malachi, orchestrating everything. He's planning something big, and we need to stop him." Phyllis leaned over the table, studying the maps. "What do we know about Malachi?" "He's ancient," Serafina said, "and incredibly dangerous. He's been gathering artifacts of immense power, and we believe he's planning a ritual to unleash a horde of undead on the city." Marie looked grim. "If he succeeds, it will be catastrophic. We need to gather our forces and strike first." Grayson nodded. "Agreed. But we can't do this alone. How many allies can you rally?" "The Crescent Moon Coven is large," Serafina replied. "And we've reached out to other covens and magical communities. We have a meeting tonight to finalize our plans. Will you join us?" Grayson glanced at Emily, who nodded firmly. "We're in," he said. As night fell, they made their way to an abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. The old building was filled with witches, warlocks, and other magical beings, all united by a common goal. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, a sense of determination hanging in the air. Serafina took the stage, her voice ringing out clearly. Thank you all for coming. We face a grave threat, but united, we stand a chance. Malachi is planning to perform his ritual at midnight tomorrow, at the old cemetery. We need to stop him before he can complete it. Grayson stepped forward, addressing the crowd. We faced Rico and his gang. We know what they're capable of. But we also know that they can be beaten. We need to work together, use our strengths, and protect each other. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Plans were made, strategies discussed. Grayson felt a glimmer of hope as he saw the diverse group of magical beings coming together. After the meeting, Grayson found Emily sitting on the steps of the church, her fox familiar curled up beside her. How are you holding up? He asked, sitting down next to her. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. I know what I have to do. We can't let Malachi win. Grayson nodded. You've come a long way, Emily. I'm proud of you. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the candles inside the church. Thanks, Grayson. We can do this. The next night, they gathered at the old cemetery, the air thick with anticipation. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. Grayson, Emily, Phyllis, Marie, and Serafina led the group, moving silently through the shadows. As they approached the center of the cemetery, they saw Malachi standing before a massive ancient tomb. Dark energy crackled around him, and the ground shook with each incantation he uttered. Rico and the remnants of his gang stood guard, their faces twisted with fear and determination. Now, Grayson whispered, signaling for the attack. Chaos erupted as spells flew through the air, lighting up the night with bursts of color and energy. Grayson fired his gun, taking out one of Rico's men. Phyllis and Marie chanted, their combined magic creating a protective barrier around their group. Emily faced Rico, her fox familiar at her side. This ends now, she said, her voice filled with power. Rico snarled, lunging at her with a dagger. Emily raised her hands, a burst of light knocking him back. Her familiar leaped at him, its teeth sinking into his arm. Grayson moved towards Malachi, his gun drawn. Stop the ritual, he shouted, firing a shot that whizzed past Malachi's head. Malachi turned, his eyes glowing with dark energy. You cannot stop me, mortal, he hissed, raising his hands. The ground trembled, and skeletal hands burst from the earth, grasping at Grayson's legs. He struggled, firing into the ground, but the undead continued to rise. Emily. Grayson shouted. We need you. Emily broke away from Rico, rushing to Grayson's side. She chanted a spell, her hands glowing with light. The undead recoiled, their skeletal forms crumbling to dust. Together, they faced Malachi, their combined power a force to be reckoned with. You can't win, Emily said, her voice strong. We won't let you. Malachi laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Fools. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Grayson raised his gun, aiming for Malachi's heart. Maybe not. But we're not backing down. With a final incantation, Emily unleashed a wave of light, engulfing Malachi. He screamed, his form disintegrating in the brilliance of her magic. The ground shook one last time, then fell silent. The cemetery was still, the air clear. The battle was over. Grayson lowered his gun, breathing heavily. We did it, he said, turning to Emily. She smiled, her face radiant with triumph. Yes, we did. Phyllis, Marie, and Serafina joined them, their faces reflecting relief and exhaustion. It's over, Phyllis said. For now. Marie nodded. We need to stay vigilant. But tonight, we've won a great victory. Serafina looked at the group, her eyes filled with pride. Thank you. All of you. This wouldn't have been possible without your courage and strength. Grayson felt a surge of pride as he looked at his friends and allies. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. But he knew the battle for New Orleans was far from over. As they left the cemetery, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Grayson felt a renewed sense of purpose. Do you like urban fantasy? Can I send you a copy of Witch Blues, the Marshal of Magic Book 1?